This is Mitchell Saltzman from the IGN Guides team, and I have been playing Crimson Desert since, let me check my calendar for a second, March 3rd. I've poured over 160 hours into it, and it's truly been unlike anything I've ever played in a number of ways. We typically do a series called Everything Added Since Launch, where we take a look at a game a year or two into its life cycle to talk about big DLCs and free updates, but with Crimson Desert, since it's added so much in such a short amount of time, we're making a special exception. So here's how Crimson Desert has changed in just a month. Before we get into it, just a quick note that this video won't cover every single change made in these patches because that would just take too long, and a lot of them are very small and hard to notice. But I'm going to do my best to cover the big ones that really changed the game in some sort of substantial way. The first big patch for Crimson Desert hit on March 13th, which was about 10 days after reviewers and content creators got their hands on the game. So, in other words, people with pre-release code played for about 10 days before any of these changes hit. Here are some of the big highlights. It's kind of crazy to think about now, but when people first got their hands on Crimson Desert, there were only 20 slots of inventory space. This patch more than doubled that to 50. In addition to that, prior to this update, inventory expansion items weren't available for purchase in stores. You only ever got an inventory expansion from completing certain quests. This update made it so that if you were in a spot where you desperately needed a slot, you could just walk over to the nearest vendor and purchase a backpack that would add a slot. And also, prior to this patch, you didn't get any additional slots when you unlocked either Damien or Unka. Meaning, if you wanted to swap between these characters, you had to find a way to make room for their own unique equipment without getting any more space in your inventory. This update gave you 5 more slots when you unlock Damien, another 5 for establishing the Greymane camp, and another 5 when you finally unlocked Unka. This patch also added the ability to summon your allies to you, albeit when a handful of very specific conditions were met. Prior to this patch, if you fell in the abyss, you'd have no way to save yourself from falling all the way back down to the surface, forcing you to find your way back to the abyss portal in order to try again. With this update, you can now click in the left stick to stop yourself from falling and reset the solid ground in the abyss. A fairly rudimentary photo mode was also added in this patch that would later be iterated upon. One substantial bug fix that no doubt saved a lot of players at launch a big headache was the fact that if you entered Scalastone from any other route other than the hidden cave, you could not learn Focus Force Palm until Chapter 9. This actually happened to me personally, and it sucked because it meant that I could not mine bismuth or interact with certain puzzles, like the one that would have allowed me to open up the nearest fast travel point to the Greymane camp. Abyss artifacts used to be sellable, for a lot of silver actually, but with this patch, Pearl Abyss decided to make them impossible to sell. Next up we have the big Day 1 patch, which helped to form the game that the general public got to experience right out of the gate. All of these changes were things that reviewers and content creators weren't able to take into consideration with their reviews or first impressions, if they released their content at embargo. Crimson Desert has a mechanic called Watch and Learn, which allows you to learn a technique by watching it being performed by an enemy. Prior to the Day 1 patch, you would have to see a move multiple times to fill up a bar before you actually learned it, meaning that it was possible to defeat an enemy or boss before actually learning the move if the enemy didn't perform it enough times. This patch made it so that as soon as the enemy performed it, you instantly learned it. They also lowered boss difficulties. Specifically, the Day 1 patch nerfed the overall difficulty of the Reed Devil fight, and lowered the damage of the Crimson Nightmare. They also made it so that you no longer had to complete the puzzle before the Tenebrum fight every time you died to that boss. And let me tell you, thank God. Because this was awful, man. Prior to this patch, you could not access the Witch's Workshop until you reached Chapter 5 in the main quest, which would introduce you to them. With this patch, if you wandered into the Witchwoods and happened upon the workshop while exploring, you'd still be able to take advantage of her shop and the cauldron. Prior to the Day 1 patch, there were no fast travel points inside Hernantown, nor was there one inside the Greymane camp, which were easily the 2 most traveled to spots. For comparison's sake, here's a side-by-side of how long it would take to fast travel to the nearest spot in Hernantown and reach the blacksmith pre-Day 1 patch, and how long it would take after the Day 1 patch.
Hey, I see you. Yeah.
The master of the anvil stands before you. If the song of the forge calls, return whenever. The master of the anvil stand. If the song of the forge calls.
When enemies tackled you in Crimson Desert, you'd have to pass a QTE involving stopping a spinner in a specific zone to break free. If you fail, you'd either be taken to jail or removed from whatever place you were trespassing in. Prior to this patch, the QTE was incredibly difficult, as you basically only had one rotation of the spinner to react to per attempt, and only 2 attempts. The patch made it so that the spinner would go around several times without changing the location of the sweet spot, so you at least had time to react to the sweet spot's location. Just 4 days after launch came the first major post-launch patch that added one particularly huge and highly requested feature along with several other quality of life improvements. The big thing that this patch added was a private storage box that players could use to permanently stash items that they wanted to hold on to, but didn't need in their inventory. The first box was located in the tent just outside of Hernantown that Cliff starts off in near the beginning of the game, and then moves to the Greymane camp once it's unlocked. This patch made controlling Crimson Desert much better. Specifically, they improved the responsiveness of jumping, character movement, UI navigation, and a host of other small tweaks and adjustments. Before this patch, Abyss Nexus fast travel spots were a rarity. Now you could pretty much hold up your lantern anywhere you hadn't visited yet, and chances were good that you'd find a light guiding you to a new Abyss Nexus, making travel throughout Pywell much easier. Prior to this patch, if you wanted to add an ore vein to your map, you had to actually mine it. With this update, both ore veins and collectibles would be added as icons on your map just by moving close to them. Lighting arrows on fire used to be a pain in the ass. You had to find just the right angle to dip your arrow into a flame, and it was just very finicky. This change adjusted the range for lighting arrows on fire, making it much easier to solve certain puzzles that required you to do so. When you ran out of your cooked meals, you often had to rely on ingredients and low-quality food items. And before this patch, they gave basically nothing. Patch 1.0003 increased the amount of health restored by these, on top of adding new food items to Hernan Tavern, making it much faster to get stocked up on food before going out on an adventure. While the patch notes aren't specific about which bosses were adjusted, they do say that some of the early game enemies and bosses had their health reduced, on top of also increasing the stun gauge buildup on bosses, adjusting some of Kirush's attack patterns, a lowering of the difficulty in the ambush portions of the Reed Devil fight, and reducing the stamina consumption of blocking boss attacks. The next patch came 5 days later and had another round of hugely game-changing additions. Refining gear underwent a pretty huge overhaul, as now the first 4 levels of refining gear could be done by spending refinement tokens instead of refinement materials. This meant less time needed to spend farming things like ore, timber, animal hides, etc., and your most important gear could be improved just by trading in a single, albeit rare, token. This patch added a time-saving Make Now button to cooking, allowing you to make a recipe without having to click into the dish, which you'd normally only do if you wanted to make substitutions in the ingredients. One of the wildest design decisions in Crimson Desert was that you opened doors simply by running into them, and if you had a key, and the door you were running into was locked, you'd just automatically use that key and unlock the door, whether you wanted to open it or not. With this change, you can now run into a door, see that it's locked, and then choose whether you want to use the key to unlock it. Prior to this patch, when you used the mining knuckle drill to mine some ore, the ore would fall down and you'd have to either climb down to grab it, or rely on your pet to pick it up. But with this, the mining knuckle drill would automatically collect ore upon mining, allowing you to stay latched onto the cliff and continue drilling. The same holds true for the Demonician chainsaw. Before, committing crimes would cause a ding to your contribution meter and level, regardless of whether you're caught in the act or not. This would lead to taking pretty big hits in your contribution points if you decide to do things like rob the Hernan City Bank, despite being extra careful about not being spotted. Now, Crimson Desert follows the law of it's only illegal if you get caught. Perhaps the most substantial change of this particular patch is the dramatic reduction of stamina costs for movement abilities like aerial maneuver and aerial swing, which were cut in half. Not only that, but flight stamina cost was also halved, allowing you to glide for twice as long, and an unintended function of the aerial stab that allowed players to use it to gain vertical height was leaned into, with Pearl Abyss adding a new animation for it and balancing it so that stamina costs increase with each consecutive use. This patch also reduced loading times by a lot, especially when fast traveling or respawning after a death. Here's a quick comparison. The next patch was not quite as game-changing, mostly focusing on bug fixes and other minor tweaks, but it did have a few notable improvements. For one, it added an Abyss Nexus and Payloon, giving you an easy way to travel the town and peruse its shops, pick up some new quests, or turn in some quests that you've already completed. Upgrading your camp now came with storage space improvements, with the first 4 expansions adding 100 slots, and the final expansion giving you a whopping 360 slots of storage space. Perhaps the biggest inclusion of this patch though was the addition of movement control options. If you don't like having to mash on the sprint button to run, you could now opt for the basic control scheme, which allows you to just hold down the button to run. And finally, if you always wanted to see your character's face without it being hidden behind whatever headgear you were wearing, you can now toggle your headgear's visibility in the languages and gameplay menu of the settings. Which brings us to the most recent patch, patch 1.03, released on April 11th. Which, on top of the usual suite of fixes and improvements, also adds some new skills for each playable character. A lot of the time you wanted to fast travel in Crimson Desert, you were told that you weren't able to because you were either moving, or you were on a horse, or you were in some sort of other state that made it impossible to fast travel. With this patch, you can now fast travel while mounted, falling, swimming, or climbing walls. Cliff got a new ability in this patch. The focused aerial roll allows Cliff to blast off like a Dragon Ball Z character by activating focus in midair and then pressing the dodge button. It can be purchased in the skill tree if you have focus level 3, flight level 2, and aerial roll level 1. Damien and Unka were also shown some love as well. Both characters now have Axiom Force and Nature's Grasp related abilities. And in addition to that, Damien's Shield Toss and Unka's Scattershot abilities now have the same effect as Cliff's Force Palm. And that's a high-level overview at the ways in which Crimson Desert has changed in just a month's time. Again, this is not an exhaustive list, just some cherry-picked changes that I felt were the most impactful. For the full list of patch notes for all of these patches, make sure to check out Pearl Abyss's website. Thanks for watching, and for more Crimson Desert, keep it here on IGN.